a wealthy businesswoman, tired of solitude and possessing a significant fortune, met a charming anesthesiologist. He dreamed of finding his ideal partner. From their first encounter, there was a storm of passion between them. Not everyone, however, was pleased with the joy in the eyes of this enamored pair. Deborah, the protagonist of our story, is a stylish, successful, and quite affluent woman. Her millions weren't luck. They were the result of her dedication and hard work. She spent years climbing in the interior design industry and eventually founded her own design firm, Ambrosia. Over 3 decades, poured herself into this venture with deep passion for her profession. However, her personal life didn't reflect this success. Although she married 4 times, each union ended in divorce. Despite being a devoted mother to her 4 children, her romantic relationships continually fell short. Having secured her financial future, Deborah yearned for something more essential, the simple joy of familial happiness. Her life took a significant turn due to a family tragedy several years ago when Cindy, her older sister, was killed by Billy Vickers in March 1984. During the trial, their mother testified against Cindy and supported Billy. Consequently, Vickers received a very light sentence and spent only a few years in prison for this horrible murder. Billy and Cindy had 2 kids, and this event deeply scarred them. Following this ordeal, Deborah faced extreme anxiety and developed panic attacks, fearing firearms. Living alone for an extended period didn't help. Despite friends urging her to buy a pistol for protection, she couldn't tolerate having a weapon nearby. Deborah always took great care of her appearance and surrounded herself with beautiful things. She invested considerable time and money in skincare, makeup, and hair care at this point in her life. She owned a variety of stylish items, including Chanel jewelry, Cartier watches, denim clothing, and Gucci shoes. The only thing she lacked was a devoted partner. John Mahan, a central character in our narrative, was born on February 3, 1958 in California. He grew up alongside his sisters Karen and Donna. His father, known for his deceitful and fraudulent behavior, imparted these traits to John early in life. John became involved in deceptive schemes and fraudulent activities to make a living. Additionally, he dealt in illegal substances and used them himself, which led to multiple confrontations with law enforcement and his eventual banishment from California in 1988. John completed his undergraduate studies at Arizona State University, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree. Later on, he joined the University of Dayton's law faculty. His friends nicknamed him Dirty John, due to his ability to effortlessly attract women. John was notably handsome, standing around 6 feet 3 inches tall with hazel green eyes and thick dark hair. His engaging smile particularly appealed to women. After completing his academic journey, John met Tanya Sells, a nurse and esthetist by profession. They got married in November 1990 when she was 25, and he was 31. Their relationship was fundamentally based on falsehoods, as John kept Tanya isolated from his family, alleging their malevolence. Tanya supported her husband while attending medical school in Tennessee and helped him obtain his license as an anesthesiologist. The couple had 2 children. However, over time, their marriage began to deteriorate. Tanya discovered from John's mother and sisters that he had been deceiving her about his past. She also found his secret stash of pills stolen from patients in need, pills he himself was addicted to, which explained his temper. Tanya promptly reported this to the police. Following an investigation, John admitted to all charges but chose to flee the state instead of turning himself in to authorities. He took refuge in a Michigan hotel where the police easily located him. John was found unconscious surrounded by empty pill containers, prompting them to summon an ambulance. While en route to the hospital, he regained consciousness, seized a medication vial, and leapt from the ambulance but was apprehended soon after. Subsequently, he received a 6-year prison sentence in Michigan for resisting arrest and illegal drug possession. However, remarkably, John served only 717 months behind bars. He somehow managed to have his sentence reduced and was freed in 2004. During this period of his life, he met Deborah. She was 55 and he was 59. They both decided to try online dating, which is how they eventually crossed paths. Deborah was impressed by John's online profile. He described himself as a divorced doctor and a Christian searching for love. After a series of disappointing dates, Deborah was pleasantly surprised when she met John. He showed genuine interest in her life, praised her accomplishments, and seemed different from others. Their first date happened in October 2014 at a restaurant called Houston in Irvine, California. John's aim was to captivate Deborah, and he did so by sharing fabricated tales of his past, like working with Doctors Without Borders in Iraq. He mentioned having 2 children and owning multiple properties. Deborah envisioned him as a selfless doctor, devoted to global service. John treated her like royalty, which was exactly what Deborah longed for after seeking companionship for so long. He even expressed eagerness to meet her family. His charming words made Deborah's heart flutter. After leaving the restaurant, they ended up at her penthouse. However, John overstepped boundaries that night. After a few kisses, he tried to escalate things further. Deborah felt uncomfortable with the pressure and asked him to leave. The next morning, John sought to amend his mistake. He called Deborah to apologize, explaining that he had consumed too much alcohol and couldn't contain his emotions. This admission once again raised John's standing in Deborah's eyes, leading them to continue their dates. As their relationship progressed, Deborah and John spent more time together. On their third date, John declared his love and proposed. Deborah was so delighted by their companionship that she overlooked several peculiarities about him. For instance, John consistently wore well-worn medical scrubs, even at stylish events organized by Deborah, and claimed he had no time to change into more appropriate attire. Deborah was unfazed and proudly introduced him as her doctor to friends, posing with him for photos. Their bond deepened, and soon they decided to move in together. Deborah's daughter Jason, who lived with her in the penthouse, was forthright and critical of her mother's partners. She disapproved of John's unkempt appearance, finding it strange that her mother, usually dressed in Gucci, was involved with someone in dirty robes. Jacqueline also noticed John's peculiar interest in the penthouse's art, statues, and paintings, as if he were evaluating their worth. After just 5 weeks of knowing each other, John convinced Deborah they should live separately. They rented a house for $6,500 a month on Balboa Island's waterfront in Newport. Deborah paid $80,000 upfront for several months' rent, while John avoided putting his name on the lease due to tax complications. Deborah was so enamored with John that she covered all expenses herself without informing her children. She couldn't understand why they disapproved of him, as he pampered her like royalty, preparing morning coffee, doing grocery shopping, and striving to simplify her life. Deborah felt she had found her perfect match in John, and hoped that over time her children would warm up to him. Envisioning a harmonious family future, Deborah arranged for John to meet her younger daughter Tara, who was known for having a softer disposition compared to Jacqueline. Tara resided in Las Vegas with her boyfriend, and upon hearing about John over the phone, decided to meet him in person. Tara's visit coincided with Deborah and John's move into their new residence. From their first encounter, Tara felt uneasy about John. His lack of cordiality, combined with his silent, solitary efforts in moving belongings, trying to project a tough exterior, didn't sit well with her. Despite reservations, Tara was willing to give John the benefit of the doubt, yet quickly began observing some concerning signs. John didn't own a vehicle, and although he claimed to have properties in Newport Beach and Palm Springs, he never suggested relocating or even invited them to visit. John appeared to spend most of his days at home, often engrossed in video games. Just before Thanksgiving, Tara decided to snoop through her mother's boyfriend's belongings and found a nurse's certificate with his name, realizing he was not a doctor. When John found out about this, he became furious and threw a massive tantrum. He accused Tara of trying to deprive her mother of happiness, shouting that she wouldn't succeed in separating them, while Deborah just stood there listening. Eventually, there was a big argument and Tara left the house. John used the situation to convince Deborah that her children were only after her wealth. They were waiting for her demise, and thus didn't want to see her happy. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Deborah's mother Arlene, a very religious woman, arrived. John put on an entire religious act in front of her, but received another scandal instead of approval. the holiday ended in another fiasco. Subsequently, Deborah opted to seek guidance from a psychotherapist who recommended establishing limits with her offspring and pursuing a tranquil existence, a suggestion she embraced. She and John made Balboa Island their home, indulging in local eateries, strolling about, and relishing the picturesque views. At times, exhibited youthful exuberance, capturing bare-chested selfies and sharing them with her, engaging in playful activities which rejuvenated her spirit. Deborah was immensely joyful, yet remained apprehensive about John's attire. His wardrobe was limited to aged medical scrubs, loose frayed trousers, and worn-out shirts, whereas Deborah desired her partner to be fashionably attired and complement her way of life. John claimed his finer garments were pilfered during a stint in Iraq. Hence, Deborah escorted him on a shopping spree, acquiring a complete set of high-end designer outfits for him. In early December, John accompanied Deborah on a work-related trip to Las Vegas. By this time, their acquaintance was just under 2 months old, yet they chose to marry. Deborah concealed this development from her children. On one occasion, an unknown woman managed to enter John and Deborah's residence. John seized this incident to persuade Deborah of the need for enhanced security measures. Subsequently, he set up multiple surveillance cameras within their home, which he operated via his smartphone. He extended this surveillance to his wife's office, aiming to monitor her activities. John's objective was to exert total control over their environment. Gradually, Deborah began to inquire about his family background and previous life. For each query, John had an immediate justification or excuse. Despite noticeable inconsistencies, Deborah chose to ignore them, convinced she had met her ideal partner. However, her children remained skeptical. Jacqueline took the initiative to investigate John's activities. Since he didn't own a vehicle, he utilized Deborah's Tesla. Jacqueline installed tracking devices on the car to monitor his whereabouts, but this surveillance didn't reveal anything significant. Then she and Tara engaged a private investigator. The detective soon returned with findings. They uncovered that John had declared bankruptcy, possessed a nursing license, but not one for practicing medicine, and had resided in Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and California. One address associated with John was the Orange County Jail. When the daughters shared these discoveries with their mother, Deborah asserted that even if these facts were accurate, her affection for him would remain unchanged. In late March, a letter intended for John was received by Deborah. The sender was a former prison inmate, but she couldn't read it, as John quickly grabbed the letter from her. Initially, he accused her of mistrust with a burst of anger, then claimed it was from a pen pal whom he was supporting emotionally. Deborah felt uneasy about this explanation. The following day, with her husband away on work, she decided to sift through his belongings. This search unveiled startling truths about the man she had wed. She discovered that John was an ex-nurse anesthetist who had succumbed to an addiction to pain medication, leading to his arrest and the collapse of his professional life. Additionally, Deborah uncovered evidence of his history as a swindler. Court records revealed that John had previously cheated and stolen from numerous women. He stumbled upon some court files online. They included a search warrant for his storage unit. Inside the unit, authorities found a .38 caliber handgun, bullets, a GPS tracker, syringes, and other suspicious items. That was the moment Deborah realized John's true identity. He was a dangerous individual and an armed felon. He had several restraining orders against him from different women. Most alarmingly, she discovered he had been released from prison on October 8th and met her just days later. Feeling overwhelmed by these revelations, Deborah examined the documents meticulously. She felt both shocked and scared. She realized the potential danger John posed to her and her children. Choosing to act normal temporarily, Deborah waited for the right moment. When John left for the hospital due to back issues, she seized the opportunity. With her family's help, she moved out during his absence. During the packing process, they found more documents belonging to John. These were prints of online comments from other women warning about him. They described John as persuasive and adept at deception. They cautioned others not to be swayed by his attractiveness and charm. Convinced of his instability, Deborah decided to end their relationship and leave. Despite her decision, John kept messaging her, pleading for her to visit him in the hospital. Overcome with guilt, Deborah relented. By June 2015, John had successfully persuaded Deborah to reconcile with him. He offered many justifications for the oddities found among his possessions. He admitted he had hidden his past because he believed a woman like her wouldn't have noticed him otherwise. For this reason, he pretended to be a doctor to impress her, and now implored her help in rehabilitating and salvaging his life. Still enamored with him, Deborah granted him another chance. They relocated together to a new apartment in Irvine. However, this decision deeply troubled her children, leading the couple to maintain some distance from them temporarily. By March 2016, the couple had been married for a year already. For 3 months, Deborah helped John recover from his addiction. However, she was deeply distressed because her entire family disliked him, especially Jason. This animosity was mutual. Matters escalated to the point where her husband forbade Deborah from seeing her daughter. When John discovered that Deborah was paying for Jacqueline's real estate lessons, he reacted spitefully. He called the school to slander Jacqueline in front of her teachers and wrote her threatening and indecent messages, insisting that her mother no longer wanted anything to do with her. He even threatened that one day he would come and harm Jacqueline. It became evident that while John appeared to be recovering, his malevolence and cruelty were intensifying. By April 2016, Deborah's patience had reached its limit, prompting her to file for divorce. She sought a peaceful dissolution of the relationship and began gradually withdrawing money from her bank account for safekeeping. Unfortunately, she kept $30,000 in a hiding place in one of the lower drawers at home. When John discovered this money, he asserted that it belonged to him as well. Realizing that divorce proceedings were imminent, John started showing more aggression. Sensing the danger, Deborah knew it was time to flee. She took some cosmetics and work items and moved to Jacqueline's apartment in Irvine, a location she felt safe due to numerous surveillance cameras around the complex. Deborah attempted to obtain a restraining order. However, the Orange County judge denied her request since there was no immediate threat. John lived in another state and hadn't made any direct recent moves against her. With little recourse, she focused on breaking off the relationship and moving on. After the separation, John relocated to one of Deborah's properties in Nevada. He repeatedly tried contacting her, but she consistently ignored his calls. Then things took a drastic turn on June 11, 2016. That day, as Deborah drove her Jaguar to work, an alarming incident occurred. Her car was stolen from the parking lot while she was at the office. The vehicle was soon found only about a block and a half away, drenched in gasoline, but not set on fire, resulting in only minor damage. Security footage from the area clearly identified John Mayen as responsible for the theft attempt, a stark reminder of his continued threat and volatility despite living in another state. On the evening of August 20, 2016, Tara came home from work and parked in the lot. As she got out of her car, John suddenly appeared. He attacked her with a knife, trying to drag her back into the vehicle. Screamed for help during the struggle. When John covered her mouth, she bit him hard. A fierce struggle erupted right there in the parking lot. Tara, wearing heavy boots, managed to kick her assailant and knock the knife from his grasp. Seeing a chance, she grabbed the knife and repeatedly stabbed John. She delivered 13 wounds, with the last stab piercing his eye. Trembling with shock, Tara was fortunate that a neighbor saw her and came to help with a towel for her injuries. The neighbor also called the police. John was still alive when paramedics arrived. They found he had a pulse. In John's car, authorities discovered duct tape, cable ties, kitchen knives, and a passport. This indicated he might have planned to abduct Tara and leave the city with her as a hostage. John Mayen was taken to the hospital but died 4 days later at age 57. His remains were cremated and no memorial service was held, as he was universally disliked by those who knew him. Deborah and her children were deeply traumatized by the entire incident. It took some time for Deborah to return to normal life, but she still struggles with guilt for bringing a criminal into their family. Now, Deborah has become very cautious, She carries a stun gun and pepper spray at all times for protection. She has stated that she would never meet someone online again based on this experience. This case takes us to Glyfada, just outside of central Athens in Greece. 20-year-old Caroline Crouch lived there with her 33-year-old husband, Bobish, and their 11-month-old daughter, Lydia. Caroline was described as a compassionate and caring but feisty person, holding a black belt in kickboxing. She adored animals and had adopted a husky puppy from the Marathon Animal Association when he was just 2 months old. She named him Roxy, and as well as Roxy, the couple also had 4 cats. Caroline had moved to Greece from England, aged just 8 years old, and had spent over half her life there. When she was 15, she met her future husband, Charalambos, known as Bobish, on the island of Alonissos, where she had lived since her childhood. Bobish's parents owned a holiday home there, which he would visit. Although he was 12 years her senior, the pair eventually began dating. They lived together in a house in Glyfada, and in 2018, the couple made plans to marry. Bobish was a successful and well-respected helicopter pilot, and Caroline had studied statistics at university with hopes to go to catering school one day. A few weeks after the couple's wedding, Caroline found out she was pregnant, but tragically, just 3 months later, she would miscarry. But after this, she went on to give birth to a baby girl, whom the couple named Lydia. Caroline's world revolved around Lydia, and everyone that knew Caroline said that being a mother was absolutely everything to her. Police received a phone call from a house in Glyfada, which would turn out to be the home of Bobish and Caroline. The officers were told a story so horrifying that even the most senior and tenured of detectives were left in complete and utter shock. When police arrived at the home in question, they were confronted by a horrendous scene. Caroline's beloved husky Roxy was dead and had been hung by his lead on the stairs. Baby Lydia was screaming and hitting her mother, trying to wake her up, but tragically, 20-year-old Caroline Crouch was already dead. Her husband Bobish had been handcuffed and restrained. He had tape around his neck, mouth, and eyes. Bobish told police that a gang of men had stormed the home in the early morning hours while everyone was asleep, and a barbaric rampage had ensued. Going off of Bobish's timeline of events, the gang had to have been inside the property for around an hour, arriving there after 1:30 a.m. The gang held a gun to Lydia's head, forcing the couple to show them where the money was stashed. Bobish directed the gang to the money, gave them what they asked for, and begged them not to hurt his family. But despite the couple's cooperation, Bobish said that one of the gang members strangled Caroline with his bare hands, while Bobish was tied to the floor, unable to help her. He said after a while he could no longer hear his wife's cries for help, and shortly after this he lost consciousness and was left for dead. When Bobish regained consciousness, he used the small gap in the tape over his eyes to find his phone and used his nose to dial the last number in his call logs. This number was for one of the couple's neighbors, but because the tape was covering his mouth, all that could be heard on the end of the phone when the neighbor picked up was muffled sounds. The neighbor headed straight over to the house and once inside helped Bobish to call the police. Earlier in the night, that same neighbor recalled hearing Roxy crying, but assumed he must have just been fighting with the cats. When police began their searches of the property, they found that the equivalent of over £10,000 in cash which had been hidden inside a Monopoly box had been taken, along with around £20,000 worth of jewelry. Bobish said the money was stashed inside the home as the couple had recently purchased a plot of land and needed to pay some workers. He thought that someone had either tipped this gang off, or someone inside the gang must have had some prior knowledge about this. The cruel, brutal, and barbaric nature of the crimes sent shockwaves throughout Greece that soon traveled internationally. The police were just as horrified and commented on how rare crimes like these were in their country. Everyone was outraged and panicked, and the community reached out to offer their support to Bobish and the couple's families. Though the couple had cameras all around the house, there was little footage available, as the cameras did not appear to be working or turned on at the time of the robbery and subsequent murder. On an outside camera nearby, they did spot a car driving near to the home around the time frame they were looking at, so at least they had that to look into. Sadly, DNA evidence collected from underneath Caroline's fingernails proved to be inconclusive. There were no witnesses, and no one heard anything. Apart from the neighbor that heard Roxy cry, apart from Babu's account and the camera outside, police had very little to go on. The story spread through the media like wildfire, and soon the whole world would be watching to see who would be arrested for these horrendous crimes. The pressure to solve it prompted government officials to announce a reward of €300,000. 3 days after Caroline's death, every shop, bar and restaurant on the island of Alanissos closed, as its 2,000 residents laid to rest the woman they had adopted as their own. Baby son went a listening test to identify the language the gang had been speaking. He was able to determine that it was either Albanian or a language from the former USSR. After looking at 150 photographs, he also managed to narrow down the list of suspects to just 10. There was an Albanian gang that had been at the center of some very violent robberies, often subjecting the victims to torture and beatings. In the 6 months prior, there had been several similar occurrences in the same area, and the race was on to find anyone linked or previously associated with this gang. Using their knowledge of the gang they were looking for and Babbitt's list of suspects, police issued a statement about a specific suspect they were looking for. He was described as strong, around 5 feet 5 inches, with short blonde hair, who was a violent abuser who hates women. Police began investigating a potential link between him and another suspect who had robbed the house of Babu's pilot instructor 3 years before. 32-year-old instructor said they were also hunting for another suspect named Yanis, who reportedly worked with the gang too. Shortly after Caroline's funeral, a Georgian man had come to the attention of Bulgarian authorities. He was at the border and had a fake passport on him. After taking samples from him, DNA evidence put this man at the scene of another home invasion that happened just 20 minutes away from Caroline's home and just 4 days before. It was very similar in nature given that both crime scenes were deemed to share the same modus operandi. But just as quickly as he was deemed a suspect in her case, he was ruled out at the same speed when police could find nothing that tied him to the couple's home. Experts were fearful and said that as more time passed by, it was becoming less and less likely that they would ever find the gang responsible. Police sources told the local media that the evidence found at the home was so little, it was as if the burglars had bleached the entire house before leaving. Babiš was frequently in and out of police interviews as they scrutinized his timeline, trying to get more information. He also told the police everything about the couple and their relationship. But Caroline's diary would soon paint a very different picture. She spoke of an abusive and volatile home, and it turned out that Caroline had been trying to leave Babiš for a long time. She first told him she was leaving in July 2020 when Lydia was a newborn. She said she felt miserable and that she was looking for a new home, but she often changed her mind, saying she didn't want her daughter to grow up without her parents together. Babiš became even more controlling, allegedly installing a tracing app on her phone and accompanying her to her therapy sessions to listen in. The couple's counselor, Eleni, said Caroline told her she was looking for an apartment in central Athens for her and Lydia, near to a cooking school that she had dreams of attending. Eleni also said that Caroline was terrified of her husband hearing anything outside the room and used to check the doors were shut over and over again. Despite often seeking advice from her counselor, one day, out of the blue, Eleni received a message from Caroline abruptly asking to end their sessions. Later, it was claimed it was more than likely that this message had actually been sent by Babiš. According to Caroline's diary, the pair would fight bitterly and things would often escalate quickly. One diary entry read, "Today my little one is a month old. It's also the day I told Bobby I want to leave. I feel awful." Another read, "I'm thinking of going to my sister. I don't know if I can keep going with Bobby. I love him so much that I can't leave him, even though this relationship hurts me." It is said that Eleni urged Caroline to confide in her mother, but Caroline said she didn't want to disappoint her. 38 days after the violent scene was discovered during Caroline's memorial service, Babiš was approached by officers asking him to come in for some more questioning. He begged to stay, but police insisted, stating they had arrested someone and needed Babiš to identify him. This was all a ruse. The police were actually taking Babiš to the station to interrogate him. His entire story was becoming more and more convoluted and impossible to believe, and holes were appearing everywhere. Alongside Caroline's own words about the toxic relationship and Babish's bewildering story, that not a single witness or camera could corroborate. Police already knew that they weren't looking for a gang of people. They were looking at just one person. When the data from Caroline's smartwatch was analyzed, it showed she was in an extreme state of mental or physical stress for 6 minutes around 4 a.m. This revealed that she did not die at the time Babish had originally claimed. Data from his phone showed him walking up and down the stairs of the house for hours while he claimed he was tied up and unable to move. After 8 hours of intense interrogation and being presented with all the evidence the police had collected, Babish finally broke. He admitted that the robbery had been fake and that he had been the one to commit and stage the depraved crimes against Caroline and her beloved dog Roxy. Police revealed that they had immediately suspected Babish of committing the crime after noticing his demeanor when they arrived at the crime scene on the morning of May 11th. Suspicion loomed from the start. Police Chief Petros Safari said, "But we lacked the hard evidence." Babish had courted the media, misled the police, and deceived the world and Caroline's distraught and grieving family, as well as Caroline wanting to dissolve the marriage and leave with Lydia. Police wondered if there was another potential motive for the murder. Money. Babish lived a very lavish lifestyle, one people wondered if he could maintain. He and Caroline had recently been on a luxury holiday to Dubai, had spent the equivalent of £47,000 on land, and designed a £140,000 dream home. Just a week before Caroline was killed, Caroline's mom gave Babish €20,000, and sources also revealed that Babish may have been involved in drug smuggling in his helicopter, which was providing him with the money to fund his luxurious life. Caroline's father David does believe there is some foundation to these rumors. He said his daughter had a strong sense of right and wrong, and if she had seen or heard anything about this, she would not have kept quiet. Looking at the timeline of events and the data available, police pieced together what happened that early morning as best they could. At some point in the evening, Caroline had texted a friend, telling them she was leaving Babish. Data from her phone showed that she had tried to book a hotel with her daughter to stay away for the night. At 12:35 a.m., Babish was seen on the living room camera with Lydia, while texting Caroline, who was upstairs. At 1:20 a.m., Babish removed the memory card from the camera inside the property. The couple continued to argue over text for over 2 hours. At 4 a.m., Caroline's smartwatch suggested she was asleep. Just 1 minute later, the watch registered intense pulse stimulation. 11 minutes after this, Caroline's watch detected no further heartbeats. Her pulse rocketed by 50% at 04:05 a.m. as Babish suffocated her with a pillow. Babish then placed Lydia next to her late mother in an attempt to create a more compelling and shocking crime scene. Caroline had died at a completely different time to that Babish had reported. This gave him time to stage the robbery by throwing clothes around and pretending to loot the house. At some point, he drowned 7-month-old Roxy and hung his body from the stairs. 2 hours later at 6 a.m., Babish made the call to report the fake robbery. A doctor confirmed that Caroline would have died in agony, and police said it was clear from the data on her watch. She had fought for her life with everything she had. In a court appearance, Babish first described smothering Caroline as a hug, saying she was trying to move away from him as they lay in bed, so he held her tightly. At one point, as her face was shaking on the pillow, her mouth and her nose were resting on the pillow. "I kept holding her in my arms until she stopped rocking," he said. "It all lasted about 5 minutes from the time I hugged her until the moment she stopped rocking. I tried to wake her, rocked her, but it was in vain. Then I realized what had happened." He then said that he threw her down on the bed and pressed her face into the pillow until she passed out, before realizing he had killed her. His reason for this, he claimed, was to protect his daughter. He said that Caroline was violent and verbally abusive towards himself and Lydia, and that he had acted in the heat of the moment to save her. "I never wanted to lie. I did what I did to evade arrest to protect my daughter," he said. It was a devastating and hurtful claim for those that knew Caroline to hear. Lydia was Caroline's life, and she worshipped her. She would simply never have acted in any harmful way towards her baby girl. The prosecutors say the killing was absolutely premeditated, pointing to the cameras that Babish had disabled and removed the memory card from before the murder and Caroline's smartwatch data that suggested she was asleep when she was smothered. Babuz is charged with 2 felonies, the first being premeditated murder while in a non-agitated state of mind, the second being abuse of an animal. The 2 misdemeanors he faces are accusing others of a crime and repeatedly providing false testimonies. One of his lawyers resigned, telling reporters, Babiš remains detained in Greece's high-security Korydallos jail, awaiting trial. Sources differ as to the length of sentence he could receive if found guilty, but it has been stated that if the jury is satisfied it was not premeditated, then he could have his sentence drastically reduced. Caroline's death sparked outrage all over the world, but in Greece particularly. It prompted protesters to march the streets, carrying banners reading, "No more domestic violence." Domestic abuse has quadrupled since the country's first lockdown in March 2020, and Caroline's case seemed to force Greece to confront its problems with violence against women, the attitudes of society, the media, and even senior justice officials. The cases of femicide are usually the result of years of domestic violence that has not been treated and has not been answered in the correct way, said Maria Alvanu, who works as a criminologist, lawyer, and women's rights activist. Caroline's grieving parents Susan and David wanted to erase Babiš in any way they could, starting by removing the word wife from Caroline's gravestone. It now reads mother and daughter. They were also granted full custody of baby Lydia. Babiš parents were denied co-custody, but they were granted visitation rights of 5 days a month. Sources say that despite everything, Caroline's parents have a cordial relationship with Babiš parents and are working together to do the best thing for Caroline Crouch, had so much still to accomplish and so many plans for her future before her life was so tragically and brutally cut short. Her baby girl Lydia is now growing up in her late mother's childhood home, and David, Caroline's father, said, Lydia is fine and like her mother grows more beautiful by the day. She is now walking confidently, eats heartily, and charms everyone she comes into contact with. Today, our story repeats the biblical story of the first crime on earth. As the book of Genesis states, and Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. This occurred after Cain had sacrificed to the Almighty the fruits of the earth and Abel the firstborn lambs. To the disappointment of the older man, God accepted the younger man's sacrifice and rejected his gifts. Driven by selfish jealousy, Cain called Abel to the field and there took his life. But unfortunately, even in the modern world, because of unhealthy jealousy, the older brother can kill the younger one. The end of June 2010 was very difficult for the family of Donna and Samuel Eckerd. Their 19-year-old son, Shawn, was missing. The night before, Shawn had a fight with his older brother Stanley and left the house, slamming the door. Shawn had never previously allowed himself to leave the house for long periods of time without his phone or informing his mother. Late that night, the whole family was alarmed by the young man's disappearance. But officially, the search for the boy began only 24 hours later. Missing person notices with photos of smiling, blonde-haired Shawn were posted at all stations, in supermarkets, and along the streets. But even after 2 days of searching, there were no results. The police had their hands up in the air as they continued their search. For more than 2 days, Shawn Paul Eckerd was officially missing. Relatives, acquaintances, and a few friends gathered a team of activists who day and night combed local establishments, interviewed random passersby, and minute by minute reconstructed the route of the guy that night. The police, without stopping the search, began to look more closely into the habits and rhythm of the Eckerd family to reconstruct the sequence of events leading up to Shawn's disappearance. Donna and Samuel Eckerd married with a history of family relationships. They had 6 adult children from previous marriages. After experiencing difficulties and setbacks in their early unions, they found their safe haven in each other's company and settled in San Diego, California. They rented a large, good-sized family home and attended the local church on weekends without fail. The family was devout and lived a quiet and unsociable lifestyle. A few years after the family moved in, they had a son, Stanley, and 2 years later, a second son, Shawn. Donna devoted herself fully to the home and raising her sons, so the brothers grew up in love and care. They both attended a good local school, and on weekends, without fail, the whole family participated in church activities. The eldest children, having reached adulthood, flew away from their parents' nest all over the continent to start their own families. But the Eckert family was friendly. They kept in touch with each other, regularly called each other, and spent all family holidays together. Shawn was a simple and fun-loving boy. He had a bright appearance, charisma, and insight that attracted people to him like a magnet. He knew how to listen and empathize, so he made friends very easily. Stanley, on the contrary, had a more reserved character and was wary of everything new. He was shy, so socializing with people was much more difficult for him than for his brother. They had one common group of friends and classmates, despite the age difference. Together, the brothers were like one, helping each other and always looking out for each other. The boys grew up well-mannered and studied very well. They always had a trusting and friendly relationship with each other. Small jokes about each other were accepted with humor by their parents. Respect was valued above all else in the family. Donna and Samuel raised their children from childhood with faith in God and according to God's laws. The life of the Eckert family flowed in its own way. As the brothers grew up, their interests unnoticeably became completely opposite. The youngest, Shawn, played in the music band, and the eldest, Stanley, became interested in martial arts. The life of each young boy was filled with vivid impressions and emotions, which they shared with the family in the evenings. Shawn was always first. His stories about music, friends, and upcoming plans took up most of the evening time. When the family gathered before dinner and shared the emotions of the day, everyone listened to Shawn. There was no time for Stanley, nor, it seemed to him, was there much to share. No grandiose plans for the future, no exciting stories, not even stories of friends to draw attention to. So Stanley humbly listened to his brother's stories. On one such evening, Shawn told his family that he had met a neighbor girl, Mary Jane. A fragile young girl with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair put Shawn in a daze. Through the open window of the house where the girl lived, he heard a magical piano playing. As if mesmerized, he went to the captivating sounds of music and entered the house without knocking. Self-confidence in his own charm allowed Shawn to get out of such a funny situation with dignity and cleverly met the girl he liked. She was a few years older than Shawn, but this did not prevent them from maintaining a friendly relationship. The soul of the company often organized picnics where Mary Jane was invited. They walked a lot, visited parks and observation decks. The budding adolescent love affair was interrupted by the unfair reality of the adult world. The Eckert family received the sad news of the illness of Dama's elderly mother, Shawn and Stanley's grandmother. In search of prosperity, parents tried to take into account the interests of each member of the family. But the decision made fundamentally changes the life of the whole family. Shawn did not want to leave his native land, his friends, and his married Jane. But the parents' decision had already been made. The Eckerts leave the city where their children were born and raised and move to another state. So in 2005, as fate would have it, the Eckert family settles in the house of Donna's mother in the small town of Spring Hill in Florida, where they begin a new life. The move was like a breath of fresh air for the whole family, because the decision was the right one. Shawn and Stanley's grandmother was on the mend. Shawn's heart was broken. He missed his band, in which he played, his walks with Mary Jane, and hangouts in his favorite city. But it is impossible for life-loving Shawn to be sad for long. And after a while, a new life becomes as full as the one he missed. Donna and Samuel safely got a job at the Presbyterian church where they were almost all their time. Donna took care of the children in the nursery, and Samuel helped with the chapel. Over the course of time, the brothers grow close again and make new acquaintances together again at school. Old life seems to be resurrected in a new place. Shawn plays in the school band again. Stanley attends a martial arts school that is only a couple blocks from their new home. Despite this new busy life, Shawn can't stop thinking about Mary Jane. Every night after class, he locks himself in his room and they talk on the phone for hours. The goodbyes are in the same way, with Shawn saying he dreams of meeting again. Each time he promises that after getting his parents' permission, he will definitely come to see her. Whereas the younger brother grew and kept his first love in his heart, the elder Stanley tried to establish himself in the family in his own way. Quiet and calm Stanley, by virtue of his stiffness and modesty, seemed to be deprived of parental warmth and attention. In pursuit of self-expression, he makes a series of bad decisions that will have dire consequences for the entire family. In May 2006, he informs his parents that he intends to drop out of school and devote his life to studying martial arts and creating a martial arts club. But youthful maximalism leads the guy into a bad company, where he begins to engage in petty fraud and try illegal drugs. In 2007, dysfunctional connections eventually led Stanley to arrest. He was caught stealing and charged with felony fraud-related offenses. The news of the elder son's shenanigans deals the first heavy blow to Donna. She ends up in the hospital with a heart attack. But the situation is quickly resolved with the help of a lawyer hired by Jennifer's sister. He skillfully defends Stanley, proving the lack of direct evidence, which allows the guy to quickly go free, receiving only a suspended sentence. This episode greatly frightens Stanley. He feels guilty and closes himself off in the hope of being understood and accepted by his family. Having survived the frightening events that happened to Stanley, Shawn does not say anything to his parents about his decisions. During his summer vacation, he takes a job as a waiter. Having saved up some money, he leaves only a note for his mother to go to California to marry Jane. The long 2-day bus ride to his beloved seemed like an eternity. The scenery changed outside the window. The day changed to night, and Shawn imagined how at the final station he would see her, his Mary Jane. The driver announced the final stop, and the bus stopped. Shawn was ready to run to her, for he had already seen her happy face through the window and her long hair, which she was tucking behind her ears with her fingers. They had spent some of their happiest days together. They'd had picnics just like they'd had in his best high school days. Shawn had confessed his love to Mary for the first time, and it was mutual. After another walk, the young people sat down on a bench. Shawn felt faint. His eyes went black. He fell unconscious. Shawn ended up in the hospital. The young boy was fading away like a match in a matter of days. Mary Jane contacted Shawn's sister. Jennifer urgently flew to California. Doctors diagnosed the cause of such a rapid fading of a strong and sturdy guy. Tick-borne encephalitis begins suddenly and very quickly causes complications of various kinds up to inflammation of the brain. A difficult struggle for Shawn's life and health began. Doctors fought for the boy's life for a long time. More than a month of coma and 6 months of rehabilitation helped him to return from the other side of the world. Shawn had a very hard time recovering for a long time. An ordinary tick bite on a summer walk turned out to be a serious injury for him. Jennifer took her brother back to Florida, where he faced therapy and a long recovery. Mary Jane was left to wait. Again, the only source of communication for the lovers was the telephone. A series of troubles and unexpected illnesses brought the Eckerd family together. Donna does everything impossible to completely rid her beloved son, Shawn, from the consequences of a serious illness. She carefully monitors his diet and exercise. Such attentive care leads to a full recovery of Shawn and to Stanley's inner resentment and jealousy, which he nurtures in bits and pieces. After a while, Shawn regained his strength and returned to his studies in music. In 2009, he finishes his studies and dreams of going to his Mary Jane to return together and introduce her to his parents as his favorite. But Shawn's plans are not destined to come true. Stanley introduces his brother to his dream girl, Samantha Rowe. Samantha, a native of Florida, quickly found a common language with the two brothers. Stanley was in love and sympathized with her, but the girl was impressed by the cheerful and sociable Shawn. For some time, Stanley actively courts Samantha, and she accepts his signs of attention. Several romantic meetings end with a passionate kiss. Stanley is immensely happy, but Samantha, who said yes to her older brother, is still thinking about her younger brother. Samantha decides to write a message to Shawn, in which she confesses her sympathy for him and invites him for a walk around the city. The guy agrees, and they spend the evening walking along the waterfront and talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. Shawn does not seek to win the girl, after all. He has long belonged to another. A rejected Samantha writes a message to Stanley and tells him that Shawn has been seeing her and confesses that he really likes her too. Stanley was furious. That same evening, he went up to his brother's room where they had a conversation. At first, the brothers talked quietly. Then their words turned into shouts. And then there was dead silence. The parents were at home, but the brothers sometimes clarified relations quite loudly. So they did not see anything special in what had happened. Mom was the first to realize Shawn was missing. He hadn't returned her calls. Recalling the evening before, she got Stanley's explanation that Shawn had left home after an argument. After 2 days of searching, the police received a frightening call. The caller was Shawn's sister, Jennifer. The dispatcher who took the call heard only a woman scream in the receiver. A piercing male moan could be heard in the background. After repeated requests to calm down, the dispatcher finally records the request for help. Jennifer continues to scream. She pleads for help and reports, "Oh damn it, my brother Stanley killed Shawn. He's in the house talking to his mother. His father is freaking lying over his dead son who's been buried in the ground since early Saturday morning. Damn it, I'm begging for help." Police officers arriving at the scene of the tragedy observed a horrifying scene. In the backyard of the house, Samuel was kneeling on his knees, 2 hands dripping earth. He was pulling his son's body out of the damp earth, screaming and trying to wipe the earth off Shawn. In an instant, a quiet neighborhood filled with sculpted lawns, where the 2 young brothers often waved to neighbors, turned into the scene of a violent tragedy. And now the Eckerd family, who once raised 2 sons, are left with the horrifying memory of digging in the ground only to find one of their sons and watching the other son being handcuffed and taken away. Stanley Eckerd was detained on suspicion of premeditated murder. At his first interrogation, he revealed that he had no intention of killing his brother. In a moment of anger, he struck Shawn on the head. The resulting injury caused Shawn to fall. Stanley checked his pulse. Realizing that his younger brother was dead, he tied up the body and carried it out the window to bury it on the lawn behind the house. Stanley's words at the inquest, "I buried him. After all, that's what you do with dead people." These words sound like the cold-blooded calculation of a serial killer, not a loving brother. In his defense, Stanley Eckerd said he did it for his mother. He wanted to protect her from the shock she might have received at the news. Afterward, Stanley planned to move his brother's body to rebury it once his parents were gone. Stanley's behavior during the interrogation varied. He cried and confessed what he had done and was obviously sorry, presenting it as an accident, or he blamed Shawn with hatred in his eyes. Stanley spoke very harshly and unpleasantly about his younger brother. He called him guilty for all his troubles, and admitted that he had won the rivalry for his mother's and Samantha's love. That same day, Stanley was charged with second-degree murder and taken into custody without bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Shawn's body. She presented to the court the results of the forensic examination, which indicated that the victim's neck showed bruising under the skin and rope marks were present, indicating that the neck had been compressed to make breathing difficult. The examination concluded that the death was the result of an inflicted head injury and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete Magrino proceeded to scrutinize the case. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing began, presided over by District Judge Stephen Rushing. On the second row were Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckerd. They wept as they watched their oldest son being led into the courtroom under escort. On April 9, 2013, the trial began in Hernado Court, presided over by District Judge Anthony Toddy. The defense was led by attorney Alan Hunter, while prosecutor Pete remained on the prosecution side. The main goal of the prosecution was to convince the jury that Stanley had carefully planned the crime. Defense attorney Alan stated that there was a spontaneous fight that led to the tragic outcome. In closing, Alan appealed to the jury to take note of Stanley's attempt to cover up the crime. In the name of good intentions, Stanley Eckerd was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and faced a mandatory life sentence if convicted of that charge. Sentencing was scheduled for May 13th. Stanley's fate was in the hands of District Judge Anthony Toddy, who presided over the 5-day trial. Second-degree murder is punishable by up to life in prison. Stanley Elias Eckerd always said he never intended to kill his brother 3 years ago before burying him in the front yard of the house. Before trial, Eckerd rejected an offer from prosecutors to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for limiting his prison sentence to 20 years. Eckerd remained stone-faced as the clerk read the verdict. The brothers' parents, Samuel and Donna, wept quietly. As the jury left the courtroom, Samuel Eckerd's sobs turned to screams, and numerous relatives gathered around Donna and Samuel. The jury agreed that Eckerd did not plan to kill 19-year-old Shawn, but the jury did not completely absolve him of guilt. After deliberating for about 2.5 hours, 9 women and 3 men found Eckerd guilty of second-degree murder. All the while, the Eckerds said they believed Stanley's account of what happened in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010, and criticized the state attorney's office for filing the charges. Later Friday, Samuel Eckerd said Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter did an excellent job. The family questioned the appropriateness of the sentence. They filed an appeal to appeal the verdict, but were denied. I really can't understand how the jury reached a verdict of second-degree murder in about 2 hours, Samuel Eckerd said. Despite that, our faith was not shaken, he said. One fact was not disputed during the trial. After his brother's death, Stanley pulled his body out of Shawn's bedroom window and buried it in a shallow grave in the backyard of the family's Spring Hill home. Samuel Eckerd found Shawn's body 2 days later. Assistant State's Attorney, Pete Magrino, began his closing arguments at trial by showing jurors photos of Shawn's dirt-covered body lying in a fetal position in the hole. This is not a detective novel case, Magrino said. He noted that Stanley, when questioned by detectives on the day his brother's body was found, changed his testimony as many as 6 times, saying he initially knew nothing about Shawn's death. For 2 days after his brother's funeral, according to Magrino, Stanley sent messages from Shawn's cell phone to family members saying that Shawn had allegedly gone to California to stay with his girlfriend, Mary Jane. Also on behalf of Shawn, he corresponded with Samantha saying that he did not want to communicate, and she should pay attention to Stanley. After hours of questioning, Stanley said that Shawn had died during a struggle in the bedroom that morning. He claimed he heard a snap in his brother's neck as they fell to the floor. He then hid Shawn's body to protect his mother, Donna, who has a weak heart. He said he planned to tell his father after his mother left on a trip. Those injuries that the defendant inflicted with his hands constitute murder, Magrino said. And he also called attention to testimony and Stanley's statements to detectives about rising tensions over Samantha Rowe. He also called attention to testimony about a conversation Stanley had with his brother and a friend about revenge in the weeks before Shawn's death. In that conversation, the friend testified Stanley said that if he was going to kill someone, he would hit the person in the back of the head and bury the body in the yard. That evidence was tenuous at best and could not dispel reasonable doubt, Alan Lanter told the jury. A crime involves an act with an intended result, Lanter said. Yes, he was involved in his brother's death, but he didn't kill his brother. Lanter pointed to testimony from a forensic pathologist who said the blow to the head, combined with other factors, Shawn's high blood alcohol content and possible lingering brain swelling due to encephalitis, likely led to his death. The pathologist also testified that hitting his head on the bedroom nightstand when the 2 men fell could have been enough to kill Shawn. Lanter reminded the jury of the testimony of Donna Eckerd, who said that Shawn suffered from severe mood swings after suffering from encephalitis. At one point in her testimony, Donna Eckerd called Shawn's death an accident. The jury also could have found Stanley Eckerd guilty of third-degree murder or manslaughter, calling the case a pardonable homicide. Lanter asked jurors not to let gruesome photos of Shawn's body and Stanley's poor decision to bury him in the yard distract them from what led to his death. Stanley Eckerd did something horrible after Shawn died, said Lanter, but he's not a murderer. During the final sentencing, excitement gripped the Eckerd parents. Judge Anthony imposed a sentence of 50 years in prison without parole. The parents were broken. One miserable day had taken 2 sons from them at once. The cold-blooded murder of an innocent man and even a brother is clearly beyond the bounds of adequate human response. In the biblical story, the brother-killer Cain was banished from paradise as punishment. But he solved the problem differently, eliminating the source of his remorse. April 4, 2007, April Jones is born to parents Coral and Paul. She was a bright and happy little girl who was the apple of her family's eye. It was discovered she had cerebral palsy when she was very young and required daily medication. But in spite of this, she lived her life to the absolute fullest, bringing joy to everyone she met. Her family said she ruled the roost with a cheeky nature whilst also being kind and loving. She loved the outdoors and would often be out riding her bike with her friends. She was also a hard worker in school and was popular amongst her classmates and teachers. On September 30th, 2012, April received a glowing report about how well she was progressing in primary school. Due to having such a fantastic school report the previous day, April was allowed to have some extra time to play outside. April was out playing with her friends near her home on the Brynagog estate. At 7:20, a Land drove a scene driving away from McClintock at speed. Just 9 minutes later, a frantic 999 call is made. The 999 dispatcher wasted no time by deploying police straight away, and within 8 minutes the first officer had arrived on scene. She spoke to a witness, April's 7-year-old friend who she had been out with. She was able to provide a brief description. The man who had taken April had brown hair, a beard, blue or green eyes, and was wearing a green jacket or jumper, jeans, and trainers. She also described the vehicle, and one thing immediately stood out to investigators. Her friend said that April had gotten into the driver's side door, meaning the car steering wheel must have been on the left-hand side of the car, when most cars in the United Kingdom will have the steering wheel on the right. Following this information, a critical incident was launched by the police. As it was an alleged abduction, the police needed to pursue as many lines of inquiry as possible to try and ascertain exactly where April was, knowing time was of the essence. That day had started like any other. April's older sister described it as being a normal day. April had gone to her swimming lesson as usual, and then skipped out of the changing rooms to head home. Despite it being October, the sun was out and it was a nice warm evening. April's older sister had gone to the youth club, when at around 7:30 p.m. she received a frantic phone call from her mother screaming down the phone that April was gone. As the sun started to set, panic began to escalate. The response from the community was massive and immediate. As news started to spread on social media that April was missing, people began to come out of their homes to try and assist in any way they could, and show support to the Jones family. But this made door-to-door inquiries for the police incredibly difficult, as so many weren't at their addresses and officers were only able to ask them questions once they returned. When her older sister arrived home from the youth club, she was hoping that April would be home by now. Instead, her distraught mother was out looking for her and police were combing the area. As the search efforts continued to mount, the media became aware that a 5-year-old girl had allegedly been abducted. The eyes of the country were fixated on the small little Welsh community, as it had been rocked by something so out of the ordinary. By 10:30 p.m., the police had put out an update saying they were increasingly concerned for April and were appealing for any information that could help find her. Hundreds of local volunteers gathered to join in the search after the news started to spread on Twitter and Facebook. Also high on the priority for the police was helping to support her devastated family. Police revealed more information about the circumstances of April's disappearance and said she was last seen wearing a purple coat and her school polo top. Refuge collection was suspended as workers joined in the hunt too. Hour by hour, more people came out to help, with the search culminating in more than 100 local residents. The town, with a population of just over 2,000, was inundated with volunteers, with some traveling from South Wales and the north of England. Police said they wanted to make sure that search volunteers were used in a coordinated and effective way. April's family weren't allowed to take part in the searches in case they came across something, so the local community stepped up to help. One problem the search teams immediately ran into was the terrain. The extensive countryside, mountains, gorges, streams, waterfalls, and uneven ground made it an incredibly difficult place to search. There were slate mines in the area too, and all of these factors mixed with the rain presented a huge challenge for those trying to find April. An area of more than 60 square kilometers was searched, and there were more than 300 specific search areas. The police knew that if April had been abducted by a stranger, every second was vital to try and find her safe and well. 8 hours on from the initial 999 call being made, The police and community were still out searching, trying to find April Jones. 120 search officers were out and searched through the night. The morning after she had gone missing, they decided to activate the Child Rescue Alert, which puts on notice all police forces up and down the United Kingdom to be on the lookout for any unusual sightings of individuals who fit the description of April Jones and the person who had allegedly abducted her. Information was being distributed to other forces, including descriptions of both April and the alleged abductor, as well as the car her friend saw her getting into. This was the first time the Child Rescue Alert had been triggered nationwide. It had now been 14 hours since she had last been seen, and there was still no sighting of the missing 5-year-old. Missing posters started to go up around the area, and police began to set up roadblocks to stop vehicles. As the investigation continued, escalating, the police force found themselves under mounting pressure from the media to release more information. Press conferences were being held every few hours, and sometimes journalists were given very little notice that they were about to take place. As the search continued, it was the task of Andy John, the detective superintendent, to try and find April's alleged abductor. After the friend of April had been allowed to rest, the police went back to try and get a more detailed description of exactly what she had seen when April went missing. It became clear that April had got into the vehicle with the assistance of the person driving, but it wasn't clear whether or not she knew them. Due to April having cerebral palsy, she wouldn't have been able to get into the car unaided. During the morning of the 2nd of October, just one day after April had gone missing, the information continued to come through, and it all started to point to one individual. A local man named Mark Bridger. He wasn't someone who was known to local police. They received information that Mark Bridger and his vehicle had been in the area around the time the abduction was thought to have taken place. What immediately caught their eye about his vehicle was that it was a left-hand drive, just like April's friend had described. There had been information to suggest that Mark Bridger had actually been part of the search party that was out looking for April. More units were deployed, and the police helicopter was also used to try and find him. They had also received information about 4 potential addresses where he could have been staying. Officers went to the property simultaneously 20 hours after she had been reported missing, but could find no trace of April Jones or Mark Bridger. When they pulled up outside one of the properties, a cottage called Mount Pleasant, at 3 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, there were no vehicles at the house. An investigator went inside and called out April's name. There was no response. Bridger had only moved into Mount Pleasant 5 weeks before. At 4:30 p.m., the police made an announcement. Mark Bridger had been arrested. Police gave details of the arrest, saying he was detained while walking his dog along the side of the road after being spotted by the police helicopter at 10:42, a couple of miles away from where April had lived. Not once did he lift his gaze to look up at the police helicopter that was circling above him. He had also attempted to alter his appearance by cutting his hair and shaving off his beard. It was about 30 minutes later that Bridger was spotted by a patrol car. After confirming his name to the officer, Bridger turned and said, "I know what this is all about." The police constable asked him, "Where is she?" Bridger replied, "It was an accident. I crushed her with my car. I don't know where she is." He was immediately arrested. Officers described him as being an emotional wreck. Despite being told he didn't have to say anything, Bridger said he needed to talk. "I've been looking for her all night and today on foot because my vehicle is in the garage. It is a left-hand drive Land Rover Discovery. I didn't abduct her. I did my best to revive her. Panicked. I didn't even know until this morning who she was until I saw the television. I just wish I knew what I'd done to her, where I put her. I want to say sorry to the family. There was no life in her. No response. No breath. No response in her eyes. She was just on the seat. I tried to revive her. I would not have dumped her. She is a human being." He was transferred to Aberystwyth Police Headquarters. The station was shut down to all of the prisoners to ensure that the teams could be properly housed there and focus completely on the investigation. Following his arrest, Coral made an emotional plea to the public for their help to try and find April. Alongside Detective Superintendent Reg Bevan, police said the overnight search involving 40 trained police officers, dog handlers, and mountain rescue teams yielded no news on April's whereabouts. They thanked the public for their efforts but warned of the challenging conditions. Police later revealed the operation had been unprecedented in the UK in terms of scale and terrain. Neighboring forces and specialist teams were helping with a focus on over 20 scenes around the area. The operation led to 600 messages from the public to the police, and a search involved 100 mountain rescue volunteers, 100 police specialist searchers, as well as Coast Guards and the RNLI. It was soon time for the police to start questioning their prime suspect, father of 6, Mark Bridger. Shortly after his interview began, he elaborated further about what he had said upon being arrested. He told the officer that April was dead. He said he had run her over, knocking her off her bike, causing her significant injuries. He said in a state of panic, he had put her into the car and then tried to administer CPR, which had failed. He then said he drove off with April in the vehicle. Bridger stated he then lost his memory and wasn't able to tell investigators where April now was. He claimed he was drunk and could not recall what he had done with April's body, but he was sure he had put her somewhere safe. The police made the decision to not release this information immediately as they needed to verify exactly what was true and whether or not Mark Bridger was being completely honest. Now that Mark Bridger had been arrested, police and crime scene examiners were able to secure his home and conduct a thorough search of the premises to try and uncover any clues as to exactly what had happened to April. Upon going into his home, the stench of detergent and cleaning products was immediately apparent and was unusually hot, indicating there had been a roaring fire in the living room fireplace very recently. On the footage taken of Bridger by the police helicopter, a plume of smoke could be seen rising through the chimney from the fireplace of his home. But despite the best efforts of investigators, there was no sign of April either in the property or any of the surrounding areas. Andy John made the decision to meet with the family of April Jones on the evening of the 2nd of October to disclose the new information that had come to light. They were absolutely devastated by the news that their beloved April was now most likely never coming home. Throughout his interviews, when challenged with the evidence that had been gathered, he would be emotional and unpredictable. Officers believed these emotions were not genuine and pointed to him being both a fantasist and a liar. Mark Bridger's confession that she was now dead left those on the force devastated. They had worked through the night through increasingly difficult conditions, clinging on to any small chance that she might still be alive. April's older sister said that while the name Mark Bridger meant nothing to her, as soon as she saw his face on the news, she recognized him. She often saw him out and about, and he used to live not far from them. As the investigation into the disappearance of April Jones moved into its 3rd day, the police still needed to prove that Mark Bridger had murdered her. The investigating officers needed to establish any contact he might have had with April during the abduction and obtain any forensic evidence they could. When the police seized his vehicle, they could find no evidence of a road traffic collision, and no evidence that the vehicle had struck anybody. Contrary to Bridger's account of April being seriously injured when he put her into the car, forensics could find no blood or traces of blood inside the vehicle. This solidified investigators' thoughts further that Mark Bridger's story of accidentally knocking her off her bike was nothing more than a calculated cover-up of a far more sinister turn of events. As the forensic examination of the car turned up nothing, they turned their attention back to the house, where they believed April had been attacked. They were able to find traces of April's blood inside the home, indicating she had suffered significant injuries at the property. They removed what was left in the fire pit in the living room and were able to find 17 fragments of her skull and 1 fragment in the bathroom plug hole, confirming the worst fears of everyone. Police did not believe that April's whole body was burned, but believed the fragments of bone got into the fire and bath during the cleanup. Searches of his house and laptop indicated that Bridger was a highly dangerous and predatory offender. This helped piece together why he had taken April to satisfy his sinister desires. His internet search history showed that he had an extremely unhealthy interest in children. He had computer folders filled with images of child sexual abuse, graphic depictions of rape, and pictures of previous young murder victims, including Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, 2 10-year-old girls who were murdered in Soham, and 13-year-old Caroline Dickinson, who was raped and murdered in a French hostel during a school trip. There were some pictures available on his computer which officers believed had been taken from Facebook and other social media of children in the local area. including April and her older sister. Following this discovery, Jasmine remembered that Mark Bridger had actually approached her on social media several months before April was abducted. She was in her living room on her laptop when she got a Facebook notification. A new friend request had come through. It was Mark Bridger. She didn't know him and showed it to her father. Paul knew him from the early 1990s when they had dated sisters, but he couldn't understand why he was adding his daughter. Coral also warned her not to accept the request. Jasmine deleted him, and that was seemingly the end of it. When the news started to spread that the case was now moving from a missing child case to a murder inquiry, around 150 people attended a church vigil for April, led by the Bishop of Bangor, Andy John, and Reverend Rogers. The despair and disappointment was evident. Reverend Rogers said there was over 150 people there, including the police, and we're very, very grateful to them for all that they are doing. It was very silent in there, and it was a very powerful and very moving service. The town was covered in pink ribbons in response to April's mother's appeal for people to wear her daughter's favorite color. Police renewed their appeal for information over suspect Mark Bridger's movements. Following this, investigators revealed that they had received more than 2,500 calls in response to their latest appeal for information. Prime Minister David Cameron said it was every family's nightmare and urged anyone with information to come forward and speak to the police. The time that officers had to question Bridger was rapidly running out. Police had until 5 p.m. to charge or release him. Although they could apply for a further 24 hours warrant of detention, Bridger appeared in court in Aberystwyth at 3:30, where police were given another 24 hours to question him. Once again, the community came out in full force. Around 450 responded to a call for people with good local knowledge to search the villages around where April had lived. Volunteers were told to keep away from the river, the forest, and places such as mineshafts, which were being searched by the specialist teams. On Saturday, the 6th of October, 5 days after April had disappeared, Mark Bridger was charged with abduction, murder, and perverting the course of justice in relation to the attempt to conceal any trace of her body. The district Crown prosecutor from the Crown Prosecution Service said that following a review of everything that had been gathered, he believed they had sufficient evidence to charge Mark Bridger with the murder of April Jones and that it is in the public interest to do so. I have also concluded that there is sufficient evidence to charge the defendant with attempting to pervert the course of justice and child abduction. This announcement led to mixed emotions. On the one hand, there was relief that the perpetrator had been caught, but also heartbreak not only for the Jones family, but for April, whose life had been taken in the most appalling way imaginable. But who exactly was Mark Bridger? He was born on the 6th of November in 1965 in Sutton, Surrey. He was the second of 3 children, and his father had worked as a City of London police constable. After attending secondary school, he went to Croydon College, where he failed to complete a diploma in engineering. Bridger grew into a strong man, a very big build and over 6 foot tall. Accounts from people he worked with described him as sociable, hardworking, and charismatic. Others remarked on his apparent obsession with the military and how he had claimed to be a former Army bomb disposal expert who had changed his identity to protect himself from any retaliation from the Irish Republican Army. He also said he had been a serving member of the SAS. When interviewed by police over April's disappearance, he told them how he had excelled during his military service. But this was nothing more than an utter fantasy. Mark Bridger had never joined the Army or served in the armed forces. Far from being a distinguished veteran, as a teenager he had been in trouble with the police. For example, in the early 1990s he was convicted of criminal damage, affray, and driving with no insurance. In 1984 he became a firefighter in London, but within 6 months he had quit due to what he called personal problems. It was around this time he allegedly split with his partner soon after the birth of their son. The split meant his parents could not get access to their new grandchild, causing a rift from which the family would never recover. Bridger would tell people in later years that his parents were dead. It was at this point that Bridger turned his attention to Wales. He knew South Wales because his grandmother had lived there. He had lived in several places where he had a variety of jobs, including bar work, being a chef, a waiter, a car recovery mechanic, and a forestry worker. After moving repeatedly, he finally settled in Machynlleth. Once there, He had worked a variety of jobs: kitchen assistant as a local hotel, a welder, helping renovate a local guest house, a lifeguard, and a slaughterman in an abattoir. He had 6 children with a number of women, and just days before April was abducted, he had split with his latest girlfriend and was deeply upset about it. He claimed he turned to drink after relationship breakups and had been on antidepressants on and off for 12 years. The attention of women was clearly important to him. Hours before he took April, he contacted 3 women via Facebook, asking if they wanted to meet, no strings attached. They also found in his search history, more disturbingly, at 12:11 p.m., Mark Bridger had looked at a cartoon image from his collection of pictures, showing young girls being sexually abused. One showed a girl bound with gaffer tape being raped by an adult. When his vehicle was recovered later, there was a roll of gaffer tape on his dashboard. The police now had a much more complete picture of what they believed had happened to April. When he abducted her, he wasn't aware that another child had witnessed it. At 8:30 p.m. that night, his Land Rover was spotted arriving at his home in a village 3 miles from where April had lived. Police did not know if this was the first time he'd been home since abducting April, or if he'd driven there directly after abducting her, killed her there, and then went out again to dispose of her body. This sighting may have not been the first time he returned home that day. The next day, shortly before 9 a.m., Bridger was spotted close to a riverbank carrying a black bin bag. A witness would later tell police she thought there was something in the bag. Later, he took his Land Rover into a garage to be repaired and pretended to help look for April before being arrested soon after. Fast-track DNA testing established that April's blood had been found at Mount Pleasant, most significantly on the underside of the carpet in the living room and in front of the wood burner. Police believe he probably sexually assaulted April before brutally murdering her and dismembering her body, disposing of her at various locations. As Mark Bridger had worked as a slaughterman in an abattoir, one theory was that he had used the skills he had gained there to dismember April's body after killing her. Bridger was due before the magistrates in Aberystwyth on the following Monday. The police said they remained focused and committed to finding April, adding that 10 specialist teams had been conducting a systematic and methodical search from daybreak on Saturday. Mark Bridger appeared at Aberystwyth Magistrates Court. A small crowd waited outside and one man threw a bottle at the van that had transported him to court, while others shouted abuse. Bridger was later driven away to HMP Manchester, formerly known as Strangeways. 6 months after April went missing, her family marked what would have been her 6th birthday by releasing pink balloons from the Brynagog Green where she used to play. On Monday, the 14th of January 2013, it was time for Mark Bridger to enter his plea. He pled not guilty to abduction, murder, and concealing, disposing of, or destroying April's body. But it emerged that his case was that he was probably responsible for her death. April's parents saw Bridger in person for the first time since he had abducted their daughter. Coral and Paul would go to every day of the trial, determined to see this awful ordeal through to its conclusion. In March 2013, it was reported by the BBC that the search for April's body was set to end in the coming weeks. Although they hadn't recovered her body, the police and Crown Prosecution Service worked together to push on and prepare their case for trial. The trial was initially arranged for 2 months after the point of charge, giving officers and prosecutors an incredibly tight timeline to try and pull together all their arguments and evidence. When his trial began on April 29th, Mark Bridger continued the same story he had tried to spin in his interviews. He was in denial about his actions and tried to present himself as a caring individual who had tried to help April after the tragic accident he was adamant had occurred. The testimony of April's friend who had witnessed the abduction was to be crucial in countering his story. She said that April had got into the front and then clambered into the back. It just drove off. I didn't know she was going to go in the van. The girl fiddled with her hair and sometimes hugged her bear as she was questioned by Bridges barrister Brendan Kelly QC. Kelly, who like all court officials was not wearing a wig or gown, asked if she had a good view of the Land Rover. "Yes, I did," she replied. "Are you sure that you saw April talking to the man?" "Yes, I'm sure," she answered. It also emerged that Bridger had taken his Land Rover to a garage at 9 a.m. the day after April disappeared, saying he had been in an accident. A member of staff told the court that while everybody locally had been upset about April's disappearance, they found it odd that he was so upset by it all, and that he looked on the verge of crying as he spoke about it. The mechanic said he kept asking how much his vehicle would cost to repair and when he could have it back. He said he appeared nervous and edgy. Another person who had joined the search for April traveled through the village where Bridger was living. She said she had seen him in a lay-by carrying what looked like a black bin liner in his hand. The lay-by was close to the river and less than half a mile from his house, and the evidence just continued to mount. When he spoke to a postman about April, he feigned shock and asked what sort of vehicle the police were looking for, but he managed to contradict himself later when he joined a search party at about 2 p.m., first telling one volunteer he had found out at 9:30 that morning, then telling another he had been searching throughout the night. April's head teacher provided an insight into the relationships he had formed when she gave evidence at his trial. She told the court how he had a history of relationships with young mothers, and there were complex relationships between a number of these families. She had spoken to Bridger at a parents' evening just a couple of hours before he had taken April, when she had seen him talking to a former pupil now in secondary school, which she found strange. April's father also gave evidence as he had known Bridger since the early 1990s when the pair had dated sisters. He remembered Bridger as being a risk-taker who drove like a maniac. He spoke of how he had loaned Bridger a book on SAS survival skills, which he would not return claiming to have lost it. Paul said he later found it during a visit to Bridger's house and took it back. As Bridger's behavior in the hours before April's abduction had become more predatory, the court heard how he had made an approach to a 10-year-old girl playing near to where April had last been seen. He invited her to a sleepover with his daughter, but no arrangements were finalized. During the police interviews, Bridger maintained that April had not been to his house, but when confronted in court by the overwhelming forensic evidence, he told the jury that images of her laying down in front of the fire had come to him in his dreams. After all the evidence had been presented, it was time for the jury to retire to consider their verdict, and on the 30th of May, they had come to a conclusion. Mark Bridger was found unanimously guilty on all 3 counts. He was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order. He looked down at the floor as his sentence was handed out and said nothing. Despite knowing he will never be a free man again, he has refused to disclose exactly what happened to April that night, or where her body is, and no more remains of April Jones have ever been found. Many believe that this is the last piece of control he is not willing to relinquish. At the conclusion of his trial, Mark Bridger was described as a pathological and glib liar, a pedophile who harbored sexual and morbid fantasies about young girls. He chose to put witnesses through the ordeal of giving evidence over a lengthy trial that had lasted 4.5 weeks. He could have avoided all of it by pleading guilty in the first instance to the charges that had been leveled against him. Detective Superintendent Andrew John, who had led the investigation, said, in July 2013, it was reported by the 2013, the family had a burial funeral with many turning up to pay their respects. As they didn't have a body, the family buried an empty casket pulled on a horse-drawn carriage, with the burial site being the graveyard just yards away from where she had disappeared. They were given ash and bone fragments from the police to bury, and the family also buried personal items alongside. This gave the family a spot they could visit to remember April and be together as a family. In December 2013, the judicial office said that Mark Bridger had lodged an application for permission to appeal. But the following month they confirmed that he had abandoned his attempt just 11 days before the hearing was due to take place. In November 2018, leading search engine companies announced they were going to make it harder to find child abuse images online. As many as 100,000 search terms would now return no results that find illegal material. Following the horrors that had occurred at Mount Pleasant, the property was later demolished. April's family were there to watch the demolition. Tragically, April's father Paul developed a rare brain disease. The family revealed in February 2018 that the diagnosis had left him unable to remember the murder. His wife Coral told the Mirror that Paul could not understand why April hadn't visited him in hospital. Her family are adamant that she will be remembered for the joy and happiness she brought to so many people and not for the tragic way that she left this earth. On September 4, 1981, 12-year-old Tim Slayton and 15-year-old Jeff Slayton had their childhood abruptly ended when they found their mother, Linda Slayton, damned in her bedroom at their apartment in Lakeland, Florida. She was found lying partially naked, beaten, and with a metal hanger around her neck. Who could have committed such a heinous crime? Could it have been someone close to the family? Or was this a random attack? Today we're looking into the case of Linda Slayton, a case so twisted you'll be shocked when you find out who killed her. So without further ado, let's get started. This is Lakeland, Florida, one of the most populous cities in Polk County. Back in 1981, Lakeland was a place with many thriving businesses and residential areas. These residential areas were filled with duplexes, and most belonged to close-knit families that had a lot of young children and toddlers. The area was also filled with lush green grass at every turn, which made the place seem homely. At 303 North Burnell Parkway, the place where Linda and her two boys lived, there were many duplexes. The family even owned one. However, they hadn't stayed there for very long. Sources said that Linda and her two sons moved from Hartselle, Alabama to Lakeland, Florida, 2 weeks before the incident took place. What could have led to her death? Could it be that she brought in old vengeance to a new place? Linda Patterson Slayton was born on March 8, 1950. By the time she was 16, she was pregnant with her first son, Jeffrey Slayton. 3 years later, she gave birth to a second son, Timothy Slayton. Soon after, she managed to convince the father of her two sons, Frank Slayton, to get married so that they could start a proper family. However, a happy family was far from what she got. Frank turned out to be an abusive husband who would routinely abuse her and the two kids. Plagued by his alcoholism and addiction, he would turn violent whenever he got drunk. Jeff and Tim recalled that their father would often turn into the monster. He was a violent alcoholic and would beat the three of them without any conscience. The thought of filing for divorce soon ran through Linda's mind, and in 1974, Linda Slayton finally became free. She divorced Jeff and Tim's abusive father, Frank Slayton, after 9 volatile years of a marriage. Linda started her new life as a single mom with 2 teenage sons. She tried her best to provide for her family and be there for her sons as a caring mother. Juggling work and chores, it was obvious that she had limited financial capabilities. They didn't have a car, so her sons, Jeff and Tim, would often go to school either by walking or by sharing rides if they were offered one. Apart from school, Jeff and Tim loved playing football, but since they didn't have a right football practice, their coach, Coach Joe, would often pick them up and drop them off at or nearby their home. A week before the 4th of September, Linda was preparing her home to welcome her mother. She wanted her mother to move in since she thought her presence in the house would help get it in order and make it more homely. Her sister, Judy, would also often come by to visit her. During her visits, the sisters would spend their time together over a hot cup of coffee. However, on the 4th of September 1981, around 8:30 a.m., Judy arrived at Linda's apartment to find something she never expected to see. On the 3rd of September 1981, the night before the murder, Jeff Slayton came home from football practice, but when he found nothing to eat at home, he headed over to his grandparents later. At about 9:30 p.m., Jeff reached back home only to find the house empty. Around 11:30 p.m., Linda and Tim, her younger son, came home. She mentioned going to a neighbor's place to play of cards. But before that, she settled in to complete her chores, and Jeff saw his mom during the dishes. Tim, on the other hand, went to sleep. Around this time, her son, Jeff, came up to her and apologized, since the two had fought earlier that day. As they made up, Linda said goodnight to her boys. Jeff remembers saying these words, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow." Little did he know those would be the last words he would say to her. September 4th, 1981. Around 8:30 a.m., Judy arrived at Linda's apartment. She went up to Linda's room and knocked on the door twice. There was no answer. She thought Linda might still be in bed, but it was unusual as Linda usually woke up before the boys left for school. As she made her way out of the house, she noticed something strange. The window in Linda's room had a missing sheet, and on top of that, the window was wide open. Judy returned to Linda's room, knocked again, and this time opened the door to find Linda Slayton's lifeless body. She screamed. This caught the attention of a caretaker near the house, and he immediately called 911. Linda was found dead with a wider clothes hanger around her neck. Her body was partially naked, and she lay right across the bed, with her head down on the floor. There were no signs of struggle. Her cupboard was wide open. Apart from that, all the other things in her room were in their usual places. Within a matter of minutes, the Lakeland police, news reporters, and medical services all arrived. The yellow sign reading, "Crime Scene, Do Not Enter," was plastered all over Linda's home. Tim and Jeff were both awakened by police officers and were asked to leave their home, which was now a crime scene. While Jeff was able to get past his mother's room without seeing her lifeless body, Tim saw his mother one last time, but this time she wasn't alive. The two were then sent to live with their grandparents pending further investigation. Linda was 31 years old when she was murdered. As soon as her sons, Tim and Jeff, were sent away to their grandparents, Sergeant Edgar Pickett from the Lakeland Police Department arrived at the crime scene. He was the one who not only led the case, but also found crucial evidence of the crime scene. At the beginning of the investigation, Sergeant Edgar found a few prints in Linda's bedroom. Most of the prints belonged to the deceased Linda Slayton. However, there was one print that didn't belong to her. It was a palm print. The palm print was found on Linda's bedroom windowsill. It was the same windowsill that had a missing window sheet. To find out what really happened to Linda Slayton, she was taken for an autopsy. There they found several marks and bruises around her arms, shoulders, and neck. Also, when her body was found, she was partially naked, which may have been evidence of sexual assault. After running the autopsy, it was determined that she had been brutally beaten at first, then sexually assaulted, and then strangled to death with a metal clothes hanger from her own cupboard. Of the evidence found, the pawn print was the most crucial, as it could identify the copard on the spot with a match. But forensic DNA analysis didn't exist back then. In order to determine who might have been responsible, the police were forced to overlay her entire family tree. The first suspect was Frank Slayton, Linda's ex-husband. Back in 1975, at the time she divorced Frank, Linda stated that he had an aggressive nature. He was abusive and did not take care of his family. It was no doubt that he would be deemed a person of interest in this case. He was taken in for questioning. However, when the officials looked into his whereabouts the night Linda was killed, they found that he was at home in Alabama. Even then, they remained suspicious of him. The second suspect was Linda's own son, Jeff Slayton. But why did the officials think of him as a suspect? Well, before Linda was killed, Jeff Slayton had a heated argument with his mother. Jeff had a very close, yet distant relationship with his mother. He, being the eldest son, felt the pressure of living in a family with an abusive father and later with a single mom. There were certain times when Jeff and his mother would often get on each other's bad side, but he always made sure to make up for it. On the night of the murder, Jeff made up with his mother before going to bed. The police questioned him about the incident. They even told them to take 2 polygraph tests. When he passed, the police cleared him from the list of suspects. The third suspect was Linda's boyfriend. At the time, Linda, a single mom, had started dating someone. The white male, who remains unnamed, had a close relationship with her and her kids. However, when police ran a background check and polygraph tests, he was cleared. By this time, they were running out of suspects until, by September 2001, they got a tip. Almost a year after Linda was murdered, there was a rumor about a 24-year-old man who committed a similar crime. His name was Jimmy Ulmer. At the time, he was linked to a crime where he pulled a 10-year-old girl through her bedroom window and nearly killed her. When the police ran a check on him, they found that he was convicted of 80 years to prison time. Also, the fact that his crimes in Linda's case were strikingly similar. To top it off, at the time of the murder, Jimmy was found staying in the same apartment complex as Linda did. The evidence found against him made the police think he was the print suspect. But there was a downside. Jimmy had died while the investigation was going on, so it wasn't possible for a DNA match. That would mean they'd have to dig up his body to perform the test. Luckily, Jimmy's mother allowed a DNA test and got his sample. However, once the results came back, there was no match. If it wasn't for the family or the next-door convict, who could have killed Linda? By this time, the days had turned into weeks and then months. In Lakeland, detectives looked at other people as well, but no one was ever charged. And without any new leads, the case turned cold. The Slayton brothers had to face a new reality in life. Their mother was gone, and they had only their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris. While the investigation was going on, Linda's parents and sons held a funeral for her, and soon after, they started to get back to living their lives and regular routines. The brothers went back to school. As time passed, they started to move on from what happened back up 303 North Burnell Parkway. Tim got back into playing football. He even recalls to this day that his teammates and coach were very supportive. When he didn't have a ride back home to his grandparents, Coach Joe would still take him to and from practice. A month later, Tim hung a photograph of his team on his bedroom wall. To him, that picture gave him the motivation to pull past it all and move forward. In the years that followed, the young brothers who just lost their mother grew into men who cared and loved for their own families. Jeff got married and went on to have 2 children. Tim also got married and started a family. As time went by, both brothers would frequently check in with the Lakeland investigators to see what kind of progress was being made on their mom's case. Jeff Slayton still recalls the night that Linda was murdered. "I didn't hear anything, and it's so hard to live like that." Even Linda's neighbors stated that they didn't hear anything unusual the night she was murdered. Despite the fact that Jeff and Tim had each created successful lives for themselves, they made sure that the case was moving forward. Tim reveals this in an interview saying, "No matter how many detectives we had to go through over here, we were going to let them know we are still here and we want to know who killed our mom." 17 years had passed since Linda's passing. But despite the passage of more than a decade, the police persisted in their investigation. By 1998, Sergeant Edgar Pickett had left his position and the Slayton case was assigned to the new investigation team. Detective Brad Grace was assigned to this case. While going through the pieces of evidence, he found unidentified DNA from a Slayton case that had been collected back in 1981. He sent this to the state's major crime lab at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, also known as the FDLE. By 1999, the crime lab at the FDLE was able to break down and develop a full DNA profile of Linda Slayton's unknown killer. After receiving the DNA profile, he then ran through the list of suspects once again. This time, he was determined to get DNA samples from each one. The year was 2001, and Detective Grice thought that the DNA profile match would definitely reveal the murderer. He made certain to speak with the Slayton brothers first. Soon, he managed to arrange a meeting with them. When the brothers arrived, Detective Grice collected their DNA samples and sent them for further testing. When the results came back, there was no match. Soon after, Jeff's name was completely cleared from the case. Frank Slayton was the next subject of investigation. At this point, Frank had given up drinking. Over the years after Linda's passing, he appeared to have lost some of his aggressive and abusive tendencies. Tim and Jeff were also able to meet their father during this time and mend some of the wounds from the past. Frank agreed to send his DNA for testing. The DNA, however, did not match the hypothetical unidentified DNA profile that the detective believed would point to the murderer. Detective Grice submitted the unidentified DNA profile from the Slayton case to the FBI's National DNA Database in 2005, where it was continually cross-referenced with newly submitted DNA samples. He eliminated dozens of suspects through the course of his investigation using DNA evidence. However, he retired in 2015, after spending 17 years on the Slayton case. After Detective Grice, the Slayton case was assigned to new detectives Tommy Hefcock and Russell Hurley. Detective Tem learned 3 years into the investigation that the FDLE had developed a groundbreaking technology that could help in identifying any unidentifiable DNA. Taking advantage of the chance, the detective sent Sissy Moore, a genetic genealogist who worked for the FDLE, the unidentified DNA from the Slayton case. The public genealogy website, Jednotch, which is run by Cece Moore, produced a list of people who shared DNA with the unidentified killer after she uploaded the anonymous DNA from the Slayton case there. She then used birth certificates, marriage certificates, obituaries, and social media to create a genetic family tree. As the investigation went deeper, Moore created 3 family tree branches for the murderer, which helped her identify the one person who was most likely to be responsible for the killing of Linda Slayton. The family tree built off the DNA profile showed that he was almost certainly the person who murdered Linda Slayton. It was here that the twist got so bizarre that it even chopped Tim and Jeff Slayton. This was the picture that hung on Tim's bedroom wall, and the person just above his shoulder was Joseph Clinton Mills, often called Coach Joe. The family tree built off the DNA profile showed that he was almost certainly the person who murdered Linda Slayton. After learning the killer's name, Detective Tammy and Russell got on with Joseph Mills' background check. They then uncovered some crimes committed by him. One of them was committing grand theft by forging a will. Even though he was never charged for it, the police did get his palm and fingerprints. And as you may recall, Sergeant Edgar Pickett had discovered a palm print on the windowsill at the crime scene. This meant that the family of the deceased might finally receive closure in the cold case, which had been open for more than 40 years at this time. Investigators compared the palm prints taken in 1981 from Linda Slayton's windowsill to Mills's palm print, and they discovered a match. But detectives still needed to compare a recent DNA sample from the suspect to the DNA from the Slayton case, despite their conclusions. So they made the decision to obtain his DNA for testing without his knowledge. They did this by taking garbage bags from Joseph Mills' house and searching them at the police station for items that could have his DNA. While sorting out the trash, they found a piece of medical adhesive tape in one of the bags that they sent to the crime mob for testing. The detectives looked into Mills' private life in more detail while they awaited the DNA results. He'd spent the majority of his 58 years in Kathleen, Florida, which was only 30 minutes from the crime scene. He had children and grandchildren and was married as well. The results from the crime lab, which were obtained almost 2 weeks later, showed that the unknown DNA that was found and Mills's DNA on the medical adhesive tape were an exact match. In December 2019, detectives arrested Mills and brought him in for questioning. Back in 1981, Joseph Mills was just around 20 years old when he committed the crime. Just 1 day after the murder, police also spoke to him, but it was over the phone. During the brief call, Mills told investigators that he dropped him off after football practice on September 3, 1981, the night before the murder. But police never considered him a suspect. Mills said to the cops during his questioning that Linda Slayton had allegedly invited him over for consensual sex. But the detectives were aware that this was a fabrication. They concluded that he targeted her even before the night of the murder, as he was often seen picking up Tim for football practice and dropping him off at home after practice. Also, the fact that he stayed near this lateness was a matter of suspicion. So what actually happened on the night of September 3, 1981? According to Mills' statement, Mills had just dropped him off at his house after football practice. Later that evening, when no one was home, he returned and broke in through Linda's bedroom window. He then waited for her to go to bed while hiding in her closet. That's when he beat, sexually assaulted, and finally strangled Linda with a wire hanger from her closet. Joseph Mills pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and sexual battery. At his sentencing, members of Linda Slayton's family confronted him and demanded to know why he killed her. All Mills told the court was, "I am a good person," and they didn't receive a response or an apology from him. Mills was given a life sentence in prison without the chance of parole by the judge. Even though the Slayton brothers take some solace from the knowledge that Mills will never escape from prison alive, they're enraged by the fact that he enjoyed all those years of freedom while they spent the majority of their lives without their mother. For Tim, it was something totally unexpected since Coach Joe was a role model for him back in the day. Tim also stated that Mills would often ask him about the case. He'd ask if there was any progress in finding the culprit. But to keep himself off the radar, he extended his help in making it easy for the boys during football practice. To this day, Tim doesn't actually believe that his mother's killer was actually the person he trusted the most. Tim even says, "I've been carrying the killer's picture in my house at this table the whole time and never had a clue." Jeff, who was completely bereaved, still thinks about what life might have been if Linda were still alive. Tim and Jeff remain extremely close after this incident. They frequently visit their mother's grave, and Jeff always lights a candle on the anniversary of her passing. Despite all that's happened to them, they've never stopped trying to live life to the fullest for their mother. This case takes us to South Australia, to the quiet town of Stirling in Adelaide, home to around 2,500 residents. One of those residents was 14-year-old Carly Ryan, who lived there with her mother Sonia and her younger brother. Carly and Sonia were the absolute best of friends and had an incredibly tight bond. Sonia said she was very young when she had Carly and was a single mother struggling to make ends meet, and that Carly had saved her life and given her a purpose. She described Carly as really funny, full of energy and life, and always the entertainer in the house. Her daughter loved having her own style and flair and enjoyed expressing herself through her makeup and clothes. Her friends said she was full of kindness and always an open-hearted person. As Carly entered her teenage years, her friendship groups began to change, and a group of new friends she had made were described as a bit more experimental than Carly. On one occasion, Carly got alcohol poisoning and was admitted to hospital. As soon as she was better and back at home, she told her mother how this had scared her, and it pushed her to make the decision to distance herself from this specific circle of people. Following this, she began looking for more friends, and the new and emerging social media platforms seemed like a great way to do this. Back in 2005, social media and social networking was still very much in its infancy. It was a new age of exciting things that had never been possible before. Being able to meet and talk to people online, all over the world, at any time of the day. And it wasn't long before Carly joined the relatively new MySpace. MySpace fast became the largest social networking site in the world, holding the title for several years. At one point, it was the most visited website in the world, surpassing even Google. She also joined Vampire Freaks, which started as a social networking site and then a clothing outlet as well. Carly would often tell her mom about the new friends she was making online and how excited she was to be talking to so many different people. One of those people was a 17-year-old called Brandon Kane. He went by the username Corrupt Koala and was an aspiring rock musician living in Melbourne with his dad. Carly fell fast and hard for Brandon, and Sonia said whenever she spoke about him, she was gushing. However, Sonia did notice the age difference between her young teenage daughter and Brandon and kept an eye on their interactions as best she could. But Sonia said every time she looked over Carly's shoulder and saw a conversation between them, everything seemed, for want of a better word, normal. The teens would talk about everything, from music to traveling to their hopes and dreams for the future. Brandon started talking to Carly's friends too, and they were all initially excited to see this potential romance blossoming for their friend. Carly and Brandon eventually began a long-distance romantic relationship, talking all hours of the day and night. As Sonia began to warm to the idea of the pair's feelings for each other, Brandon's dad, Shawn, also took an interest in the couple too. Shawn would often comment and interact with posts the pair would make back and forth, and it seemed that he was approving of the young couple too. Sonia said that Carly definitely felt a gap in her life having grown up without her father, and that Shawn seemed to be helping to fill that void. Carly was busy planning her 15th birthday party and invited Brandon to come to her house and celebrate. Although the pair had still not met in person and this would be the perfect time, Brandon called Carly and said that he was sorry, but he wasn't able to make it. Carly was crushed, but seemed to perk up when Brandon made a suggestion. He said his dad Shawn would be passing by on a work trip and would love to come and meet everyone on Brandon's behalf. Shawn worked in security and his job would often take him around to different parts of various cities. Carly came bounding into the kitchen handing the phone to her mom, saying that Shawn was on the end of the line and he wanted to introduce himself. Shawn said to Sonia he would love to drop off a present for Carly from Brandon and finally meet the family of the girl his son was so crazy about. Sonia, although hesitant, agreed. As they had all been talking for so long online, it didn't feel like a stranger. Felt like an old friend. On the evening of Carly's party, Shawn arrived at her home to meet her and her family. He was in his security uniform and even showed his ID badge to Sonia before he came in. Sonia said he was polite and keen to talk to everyone. She said Carly was beaming to finally be able to meet her boyfriend's dad and get to know Brandon a bit more through the man that seemed to know him best. Shawn gave Carly the gift from Brandon, which later turned out to include some underwear and a nurse's outfit. Shane was attached to Carly all night and was behaving in a strange and seemingly possessive way, but Carly remained calm. She valued her boyfriend's dad's opinion and wanted him to like her and her friends and family. As the night drew to a close, Shane said he was going to leave and get a hotel room. Sonia told him not to be silly and he could stay in the spare room, having traveled so far to get there and spent a lot of money doing it. Early the next morning, Sonia was up and getting ready. As she walked past Carly's room, she saw Shane asleep on Carly's bed, fully clothed on top of the covers, with all of Carly's friends in the same room too. Sonia was horrified and demanded Shane get his things and go. He didn't say a word as he left. He just got in his car and drove off. Sonia said to Carly that she no longer cared how much her daughter liked Brandon. There was something seriously unnerving with his dad's behavior, and the whole situation felt very wrong. Carly did confess to her mom that Shane had behaved inappropriately towards her that night. But despite this, Carly was devastated at how things had ended and begged her mom to patch things up with what could potentially be her future father-in-law. But this encounter had unnerved Sonia too much, and after this, she not only cut the internet off and took Carly's phone away, but threatened to call the police. Carly pleaded with her not to, distraught at the thought of not being able to ever see Brandon. Sonia eventually gave Carly her phone back on the condition that any and all communications with Shane ceased. Sonia sent Shane an email saying that if he ever contacted her daughter again, the police would be involved. She was shocked that the email she received back was nasty and vicious, with Shane threatening legal action against her for defamation. He called Sonia pathetic and a gutless bitch, saying that if Carly and Brandon carried on seeing each other, Carly would be moving into their house, and thus Sonia would lose her battle anyway. Almost a month had passed since the birthday party, and on February 19th Carly spent the morning with Sonia, painting her nails and getting ready for a sleepover with a friend. Sonia had spoken to her friend's parents over the phone, and the sleepover had been planned for a while. Carly seemed to be back to her usual self and was looking forward to spending the night with her friend. As she was leaving, Sonia said they gave each other 4 huge hugs. Whenever the one let go, the other would pull in for another hug. Carly said, "Love you, Mom," and headed off down the street. Early morning, February 20th, Port Shoe Bay, Port Elliot, 80 kilometers south of Adelaide. South Australia police received a call, reporting that the body of a young female had been found floating face down in shallow water. A pathologist quickly confirmed that this was definitely no accidental death and the injuries on her body were consistent with being attacked. Around 9 a.m. Sonia was trying to ring Carly, but her phone was turned off. Her teenage daughter was glued to her phone all hours of the day and nights, and alarm bells rang very quickly. As she hung up the phone to try and call again, she received a call from an unknown number. "Is this the home of Carly Ryan? I've just found her purse on the side of the road," the man on the phone said. The location of the purse was a long way away from the place Carly was supposed to have been staying, and she had absolutely no reason to be there. Panic was setting in, and a frantic Sonia rang the home of the friend that was hosting the sleepover. To Sonia's horror, the parents said that Carly hadn't shown up. Sonia called the police straight away. Over the phone, the police informed Sonia that they had just found a body that seemed to match her daughter's description. There was no ID found with or near the body, and so Sonia went to identify the girl, the whole time telling herself it couldn't possibly be her daughter. But she said the minute she saw the nail polish, she knew it was Carly. As word began to spread, Carly's friends would find out by turning on the news and seeing her face on the screen. The community was collectively shattered, and nobody could think of anyone that would want to hurt Carly, let alone kill her. The area of the beach where Carly was found showed signs of a struggle. Her jewelry was broken and scattered around, and police also found the tip of a latex glove and drops of blood on the sand. The autopsy revealed 19 separate injuries, with 6 to 8 of the injuries being blows to the head. Her cause of death was a combination of facial trauma, smothering, and drowning. It also revealed cannabinoids in her blood and beach sand in her esophagus. The police began collecting footage from the cameras outside the surrounding shops, and one camera showed Carly at 07:04 p.m. She was walking down the boardwalk with 2 men. A witness also came forward and described seeing the men that seemed to fit the same description on the beach near to where Carly was found. This was just before 10 p.m. that night. The witness recalled seeing a lone pale blue car in the parking area by the beach as well. Although he couldn't remember the car's number plate, he did remember seeing some sort of security badge with the number 24 on it, and this was in the window by the passenger seat. Neither Sonia nor Carly's friends could give any explanation as to why she ended up on that beach or how she got there. As well as the surveillance footage, police were going through Carly's online interactions with a fine-tooth comb, and the only name that was consistently popping up was Brandon Kane, amongst lots of messages that showed an infatuation with each other. Police also found some odd and out-of-place communication between Brandon and Carly's friends. Emails and messages that, over time, had become increasingly aggressive and nasty. It became clear to detectives that Brandon Kane was extremely manipulative and had been trying to stop her talking to her friends for a long time. The once outgoing and sociable Carly was becoming increasingly isolated from everyone apart from him. Police were not only looking to talk with Brandon, but they also wanted to speak with his father, Shane. As the investigation deepened, Sonia told police about the inappropriate and unnerving incident with Shane at Carly's. Some of the calls were linked to a small suburb called Walkerville, just miles from Carly's home. There was a caravan park in Walkerville, and police wondered if maybe whoever was on the end of the phone had stayed there at any point. Police got a hit. Two men fitting the same descriptions as the camera footage and driving the same car the witnesses had identified on the beach had in fact stayed at the park in one of the cabins. The vehicle that was with them was registered to an address in Melbourne. Detectives finally had a lead on finding who were now the only two suspects in Carly's murder. When the police arrived at the address, they found the blue car outside, with the same security badge in the window that the witness had described. However, the address was not linked to Brandon Kane, and it was not linked to Shane either. It was linked to a 48-year-old father of three, Gary Francis Newman. 11 days after Carly had been killed, police knocked on Gary's door. He was swiftly placed under arrest and didn't say a word to the police. Officers began searching his house, and as they opened the desk drawer, they found pages and pages of names, passwords, and emails. Gary had more than 200 online personas, two of which were both Brandon and Shane. And as police were inside his house, on his computer were other chats open, with more teenage girls he had been talking to. He was logged into these chats as none other than Brandon Kane. He had an extensive amount of fake photos and had also used family members' and friends' details to help him carefully craft numerous profiles. Police said that because he so often used his family and friends and their information, there often seemed to be something to support these profiles as appearing to be real. It's only when you dug deeper, the truth started to unravel. They also found a camera that had been taken from Carly's house on the night of her birthday party. One of these photos was of Carly and Gary, who she thought was Shane, standing next to each other talking. The security uniform he had come to the Ryans' house in, along with the ID badge, were also completely fake. And the boy seen walking down the boardwalk with them on the day Carly was killed was in fact Gary's 17-year-old son, who is believed had essentially been hired to play the part of Brandon that day, although this remains unconfirmed. The evidence against Gary was irrefutable. On the evening before she was set to go to her friend's sleepover, she had actually made plans with Gary, who told her that he and his fake son Brandon would be in town the following day. Having waited 18 months to meet the person she had fallen in love with, Carly couldn't refuse the offer, and she promised she wouldn't mention it to her mom. After the three met up, Gary drove Carly and his son to Horseshoe Bay, Port Elliot. Based on the evidence, police believe that Carly was violently assaulted by Gary after she had refused his advances. They believe he pinned her down by sitting on her back and pushed her head into the sand, suffocating her. Given Carly's small size and frame, there would have been no way she could have fought him off. It is believed that Carly was unconscious when Gary left her body in the shallow water, clearly hoping she would either float away and never be found, or that it would look like she had accidentally drowned. And it is thought that this whole horrific ordeal was witnessed by Gary's son. What remains unclear, however, is whether his son was involved any more than that. But sound from the beach was found in both Gary and his son's shoes. Forensic experts determined that Carly was alive and fighting for her life for at least 30 minutes on the beach. Almost 3 years after Carly's death, in October 2009, Gary Francis Newman finally appeared in court. Both his and his son's identities were initially not revealed to the public or media. Although the press argued that the public had a right to know who had done this, Gary's identity remained concealed for a long time, and his son's identity remains hidden to this day. Gary asked to plead guilty to manslaughter, but prosecutors would not accept this plea. His now 19-year-old son also entered a plea of not guilty. Throughout the trial, Gary stated that he struggled with bipolar disorder at OCD and was asexual and actually not interested in sex at all. He claimed that he was like a father figure to Carly and that he had only chatted with her through his Shane profile, but never Brandon's. He blamed his teenage son for the Brandon Kane profile, saying it was him that made it and was using it to talk to Carly and to the girls. However, the prosecution said they believed that the Brandon identity was actually operated by both Gary and his son, either in conjunction or at different times. Gary admitted that he had met up with Carly on the day she died and they did all go to the beach together, but he claimed that they had said their goodbyes and parted ways. He told the jury he had offered Carly a lift home, but she refused, and he and his son left her on the beach that evening. He even went as far to say he hadn't even heard about her death until 3 days later, and following this, he had phoned Crime Stoppers to try and help catch the killer. Gary's son, who had been at the beach that day, testified against his father. He said that while the three of them were sat on the beach, Gary made more advances towards Carly. Carly tried to walk away, but Gary attacked her from behind. Although his son denied having anything to do with directly killing Carly, he did admit to helping Gary cover it all up. One of Gary's other sons also testified against his father. He said that when his dad had returned from Carly's birthday party, the same night she first rejected his advances, he was infuriated and angry. He vowed to his sons he would return to Adelaide to fix Carly up. Gary even later bragged to his son about what he had done to Carly on that beach, showing him the bruises on his hands from hitting her. At that time, his son didn't take his father's words seriously, thinking it was all just talk. The jury's deliberations lasted 10.5 hours over 2 days. Many were scared that Gary could walk free. There hadn't been a case like this before in terms of prosecuting someone for a crime which tackled a digital and online issue, and how that would be handled in the courts made people very nervous for the outcome. But the jury came back with a guilty verdict, and Justice Trish Kelly sentenced Gary to a mandatory life sentence, with a 29-year non-parole period. Gary's teenage son, who was a minor at the time of the crime, but a witness to the killing of Carly, was cleared of all charges. The court believed he deserved a second chance, and his identity remains hidden to this day behind a suppression. Justice Kelly said, "It was a terribly cruel thing you did to this beautiful, impressionable 15-year-old child. I say child because that's what she was. A child that fell in love with the idea of a handsome, musically inclined and rather exotic Brandon Kane. The real man was in fact an overweight, balding, middle-aged pedophile. You were obsessed with Carly to the degree that when you couldn't get your own way, you were prepared to kill her." Gary subsequently appealed his conviction on several grounds. One of those was that Sonia should not have been allowed to give evidence at his trial. But after 5 months, this appeal was denied. Carly's case and the extent to which Gary had gone to lure Carly in highlighted the emerging phenomena of grooming, catfishing, and online predatory behavior. As social media and networking was still so new, the idea of people potentially abusing these platforms and abusing people's trust online was really something that hadn't been thought much about until this time. There really was a lack of understanding about the way in which platforms like this could work and operate in a potentially harmful way. Sonia said, "If I have to live here without my child, I have to do something meaningful. I have to do something to prevent this suffering." And that is exactly what she made it her mission to do. In 2010, the Carly Ryan Foundation was established. This is a certified online safety program provider under the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner, and it delivers online safety and healthy relationship seminars to students and parents. The organization provides a range of services and support in the areas of internet safety and crime, cyberbullying, connection to resources and counseling, and contributing to law and policy reform. Sonia Ryan is also a member of the Education and Prevention Working Group with the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation. Her relentless work saw her become a finalist in the 2017 Human Rights Awards, and she is a previous winner of the South Australian of the Year award for her continued contribution to the community. Carly Ryan was the first known person in Australia to be killed by an online predator, and this prompted some serious legal changes. After setting up the Carly Ryan Foundation in her daughter's honor, eventually in June 2017, Carly's law would come into effect. This meant that people caught lying about their age online to minors could be prosecuted. In August of the same year, Carly's law was used for the first time when an already convicted pedophile in his 30s was found to be grooming children online posing as a young woman. An even stricter version of this law was then introduced a year later. The year the law came into effect, a patchwork quilt was hung up in Parliament. It was made out of Carly's favorite pieces of clothing and represented the 10-year fight for a much-needed change, and Sonia continues to fight for Carly's name to be remembered and her voice be heard. She hopes that Carly's law will save children from predators online and potentially even save their lives. She said, "I'm sure she's looking down at everything we're doing in her name. It's an incredible legacy for her. And to know she didn't go through that horrendous suffering for nothing. The children will now be saved in her name from terrible harm and suffering. I fought with every breath in my body for Carly's legacy. What else can a grieving mother do? Changes you forever." Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.